Hello, this is Daedalus with Nerds and Stuff, and today we'll be taking this Reaper Bone Stone Giant from this to this. Let's get started. So we're going to start out today just by putting down some metallic paint. We've already primed all those metallics by going through with the brown paints earlier, and now we're just going to start laying down those brasses and golds. So this first one we're starting out with is Vallejo Game Air Glorious Gold. It's just coming straight out of the bottle, and we're just kind of hitting some of these oddities he's got hanging from his belt. You know, if he's some kind of labor or something, maybe they're tools. I don't know, I kind of figured they were like prized possessions or baubles or something, so I figured I'd make them all nice and shiny. That and, you know, the metallics just look good in contrast to his dark skin. So now we've switched over to the bright bronze for his kind of plate armor he's got. He's wearing like this plate armor skirt. It's not quite like traditional plate. It's more like, plates that are sewn together. So I guess you could kind of call it more like a plate mail, maybe? That would make more sense to me. But anyway, we're just hitting these with the bright bronze. I wanted them to be a slightly tarnished, darker color. I realized after I started painting this, though, that there wasn't a whole lot of distinction between the bronze and the gold. But that's okay, because it still ended up looking really good. And now I'm just kind of getting these armbands. Upon further thought, I realized these are probably cloth, but it's not uncommon. I mean, once in a while I see women wearing kind of like, best I could describe it would be like an armband like this. It's kind of like a bicep bracelet, maybe? I don't know, I'm no fashion expert. But I'm getting those too, and then I came to the realization that I've accidentally painted a really good looking scheme for like a Egyptian army. I think in Warhammer Fantasy there's a Tomb Lords or a Tomb King's army or something. It's like a bunch of mummies and zombies and skeletons and stuff. I wonder if they've got any of the Egyptian gods, because if so, I might need to pick up like an Anubis or something and kind of duplicate this paint scheme for that model. Instead of going with the bright brass, though, just keep it nice, bright, shiny gold. So, just getting his bracelet now, and just kind of, doing that miniature painting thing, making mistakes and covering them up, and making more mistakes and covering them up. But that's the nature of the beast. That's kind of why painting is a true work of patience, because you really have to be patient with yourself to be able to pull it off. Otherwise, it is really easy to get frustrated, and this is on a big model, not a really small one. That's even worse, because then I know when I was early painting, I'd run into these situations with these models where I would sit down and start painting and get tired, and hand gets sloppy and shaky, start making mistakes, try to fix the mistakes, end up making additional mistakes, and it seemed like for every one I fixed, I made two more, and I ended up, I think when it got to the really bad point, I had this plastic bones I was painting, and I was just trying to do the base coat and just really tired, and I kept doing this like chain style mistakes, and I ended up like throwing the model against the wall and just I don't even know what I did with it. I think I gave it away to someone else to paint or something. Just got rid of it. And since then, I've come up with some discipline, like, not trying to finish an entire model in one sitting. While it is possible, once you hit that fatigue point, which quite possibly could change frequently. I know some days I can sit down and paint for 6 hours, and some days it's 2. But once you hit that fatigue point, you recognize it for what it is. It's your limit for the day, and you move on. And that's okay. You don't have to do it all at once. The only recommendation I have is that when you do stop, if you've mixed any paint, make sure to record how it's been mixed. Keep your parchment paper on your wet palette so you can see how it's dried, so that when you remix it, you can, put the paint side by side and let it dry, and you can see how close you are. Because there have been times when I've lost that parchment paper or I wasn't painting on a wet palette. Went and cleaned my palette off, not thinking, and just moved on. And then had to redo massive parts because I mixed a special paint. So anyway, we're moving on now. We did the rest of the metallics, got the gold armband on his one kind of gauntlet, and we're starting to paint his bags. He's got like a satchel on one side and like a book bag, maybe, a pack on the other. And we're starting that off just with putting down a generous coat of Reaper Master Series Magma Red. And I want to build these up to orange, because I think it'll complement the brasses and the bronze well, and not be too distracting. I thought about going blue or green, and then realized that it would be kind of too drastic of a change on the color palette. The skin tone is so dark that if I was to pull those colors, the eyes would just jump right away to the kind of the auxiliary bags, which are just really small highlight pieces. They're just kind of fluff, if you will. And so, sticking in that routine, I didn't want to paint him black, because I have a lot of black on this model already, and I didn't want to paint him brown, because I just painted the pelt brown. So, I decided to go with something that might bring out a little bit more of the metallics, and orange was a good choice. And then I realized I was dumb, because I didn't paint the bags brown. So, you know, learn from my mistake, kids. If you're going to paint red, you need an intermediate layer. You know, be it white or a brown, something. Red does not cover on black whatsoever. I'm sure if you've ever tried, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But you need some kind of step so that you can make that transition. Most red paints, I don't know if the pigments are thin, it's gotta be the pigments. They just don't have the same concentration as others. Probably for control purposes, you know, so you don't just have this paste-like red, you know, paint. But you just end up needing more and more layers to cover. So I think I ended up doing 4 layers of the red. And now I'm glaze highlighting with Reaper Master Series Explosion Orange. And these are actually one of the color triads. I love the Reaper color triads. They make, you know, mixing selections so easy. The last one in this triad, I believe, is Sun Yellow. I say I believe because they may have gotten out of order once. And I don't know. It's weird. With my local game shop, once the paints run out, they only order when they're down to like a third of the Reapers. And I don't want to order one paint bottle and pay shipping. So if I get up there where I'm hitting that free shipping point as Reaper, then I'll definitely grab a couple of paints. But I just just hurt when I tried to buy something like that and pay shipping. Shipping sucks. So I'm just doing additional coats here. Just glaze layering, kind of as you've seen in my previous videos. Just thinned paint, thinned with my Reaper Flow Aid, which is probably just the same acrylic medium they use in the Reaper paints. I am going dramatic because I want it to be worn, kind of the edges of the leather to be really noticeable and bright. And here I'm just kind of putting down a glaze on some of the red to kind of brighten it a little bit, because I don't want the bag to be red. I want it to be orange. So just doing additional glaze on the bag now. I'm kind of just bouncing back and forth between the two, building up the orange color. While one dries, you know, I let work on the other one, and so forth. But the orange is definitely coming along. You can really see it on the bag, and its darker areas are really red, which I like. You know, it's just kind of like a fire bag or something. I don't know. It looks nice. So now we're just going to move on to a yellow glaze. This is just going to be to highlight up the orange highlights. So we've already been building this orange color. These are the extreme highlights in the orange. This is where the light is directly hitting, you know, and it's a real thin yellow glaze because I'm building up an orange color. That's what I want to see, not a red color. So if it was a red, I would just build up the orange and call it good. And I don't want to go full heavy with the yellow because I want this to be orange. So now we're going to be painting the head of his hammer. And this is just an amalgam, a mix of the ghost gray from Game Color and black. That's kind of how I mix most of my grays, just that combination of the two in different concentrations. And in fact, all of my highlights on this are different concentrations of just ghost gray and pure black. Just kind of building it up. Mixing it, finding a color I like. Right now I'm doing some real edge highlights. A lot of the time you'll see this on like armor plate, on like tanks and stuff for Warhammer, or just sharp edges like on the hammers here. It's kind of tricky on this one because it's really small and I don't have good access to it. But all you do is you load up your brush and you just run kind of like the side of the brush along the edges, like I'm doing right there. That way you only get the paint on the part where the brush is touching. You don't really want to use the bristles, like the edge of the bristles, your normal painting surface, because that tends to fray out. If you just use like the side of the ferrule, you'll find that it leaves a more even coat when doing these sorts of edges. And now I've just mixed up a darker stone gray, just that same ghost gray and black, and I'm just kind of mashing it on to give the stone a little bit of texture. So now I'm just applying some paint to the cloth wrap around the handle. This is just Reaper aged bone. I plan to wash it dark so it looks nice and dirty, kind of going for like a linen wrap type thing, you know, adventurer's clothing that he stripped off and used to wrap his handle so that his poor giant hands don't hurt when he's using it all day. Just doing a few touch-ups now, you know, getting the leather in a couple of places. I got a couple of places where it's streaking a bit, and like on the front here, with the leather straps around these things, stone daggers or chisels or whatever they may be. And just getting the metallic on the buckle. Just a real minor little thing, but something I missed earlier. And now we're going to be applying a wash. We're just pulling the Seraphim Sepia from the Citadel line straight out of the bottle and just kind of applying it to various areas. I really like this one on the Brassy metallics because it gives them a nice tarnished look without making them look incredibly dirty. And it gives a lot of variety in the pigment itself, like the way it dries. It makes the brass look really good. So just layering it on really thick on those plates, making sure all those holes get filled so that sculpted detail is apparent. And just getting the hammer and the leather, getting the strap and kind of the wood as well. It's not quite my normal fare on wood, but it'll serve its purpose. And now I'm also using it on the bags because I don't have the orange wash. I never picked it up. I figured I'd do well enough with the sepia because it's kind of orangish. So I did it on those two. I put it on the stone and then didn't like how it looked, so I just had to pull it off real quick. We'll end up coming back and doing something different there, but it just didn't look good. So just getting the rest of those metallics, got his armbands and his gauntlet now, as well as, and I'm putting this on the gold as well. This isn't like just the brass, or the bronze, excuse me. This is the gold too. So just getting everything, making it look real nice. Laying it on thick on those places that are more like his wristband here, that have different, very noticeable, so that when it dries erratically, it looks better. Just making sure that everything has got wash on it, so that those shadows and stuff can be picked out and look good. I hate it when I do a model, and I get it all done, washed up, looking nice, and then I'm inspecting it afterwards, and I see one spot that I missed somewhere, and it just looks bad. And I hate it when that happens. It's so frustrating, because there's no easy fix. So now I'm just coming back with Nuln oil, and getting the hammer some more, getting that stone, making it look good, as well as darken the wood a little bit. And now we're going to start with his club. So I'm just laying down some Woodstain brown. This is the dark brown in the, let's say the wood 3-color set from Reaper. This is usually where I like to base my wood. Well, I don't know. I use 2 different kind of palettes. I use this one where, I put the Driftwood brown down and then layer up with the shield brown, or excuse me, I put the Woodstain down. and layer up with the shield brown and, you know, final highlights with the driftwood. And sometimes I just use the shield and driftwood, depending on how dark I want the wood to look. But since I did his pelt in the shield brown, I didn't want his club, for the most part, to match his pelt. So I decided to go the darker tone. You know, step it down, give that extra contrast, so that it doesn't look similar even though I'm technically using the same paints. You know, that same color Triad. To get careless and accidentally drag it and ruin a lot of work. I've done it before, I've done it many times. I still accidentally do it when I'm just getting careless, you know, too complacent with the painting. So, just being really careful, making sure I get that coverage all the way across. I'm not too worried about getting like absolute coverage here, because if the black streaks a little bit, it'll just kind of look like wood grain. And you know, the vise has its limits. Once in a while, you just gotta pull it off because you just can't see what you're doing. The vise has been great so far. I've really enjoyed it with the painting I've done with it. It's made things a lot smoother. You know, I'm not quite flipping the... I'm sure it's a lot easier to watch too, because I'm not spinning the models anymore. It's probably not nearly as nauseating to be watching, you know, getting the old vertigo come out. So now I'm dry brushing the shield brown on, and I'm mostly just trying to get a streaky type dry brush, because I want that wood grain look. And now I've stepped up and I am doing the same thing with the driftwood brown. Just on the top though, just on those edges, just really, and this is the top of the Triad, just making it nice and bright where the sun would be hitting. Now, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. The model's got all these grooves in it, or the model does, but the weapon has got all these really cool textured lines. And I put the wash on so that it would blend in the wood tones together, and then I really liked how it looked. I was gonna come back with something and make some kind of glow effect in all these, and just, you know, put myself through hell trying to trace these delicate, you know, wormwood kind of patterns all the way throughout. I am really glad I didn't though, because I think once that wash dried in there, it made it look really good. It didn't need to glow. So now I'm just painting the base, and he's standing on kind of just a bunch of rocks, which is terrible because he's a stone giant and his skin is like rocks, so you've got rock on rock action. And this is once again just another mix of ghost gray and black. And I'm just kind of trying to get a uniform coat of gray down. It's brighter than I usually do for my rocks, but I needed that contrast with his skin. You know, I didn't want the rocks I ended up painting to be really close to his skin and then look like he was just kind of a big amorphous figure just coming out of this big pool of rock around his ankles until he forms into this giant upper half. I've got a very active imagination, as I'm sure you can tell, especially if you watch more than one of my videos. Go to some interesting places in the commentary. But just a lot of surface area to cover with this gray. And it's going. There's a lot of little edges that are sneaky, especially on the vise. I don't quite have the same mobility I'm used to. I'm still getting used to it. I've been painting with just my claw grip on my hands for a very long time, and, well, very long in my perspective, i.e. 2 years. I'm sure a lot of other people have been painting for a lot longer, but that's my experience. And switching to something new, it's gonna take me more than a couple of models to get used to it. We just, you know, model painters, we get in our old habits, our old ways, and get crotchety and don't want any change. You know, we don't want to use new paints and new colors, don't like new model lines because old ones are all good. I'm just kidding, by the way. I embrace new techniques. especially if it's something that actually ends up looking better than what I usually do. Then I tend to adopt it, actually, and start making it the norm. Just touching up his feet now, I got a little careless and had some drag. I also pulled the pin out when I was trying to remove the model. So now that he's back in there, I'm just getting a few touch-ups on spots I missed with the brush when I was doing it kind of really big. And now I am just dry brushing a lighter gray. I want it to look streaked and weathered so that it's kind of multi-tone. I want it to get that rough kind of dry brush texture. I don't want it to be nice and clean. And now we've got some depth to the rocks. So now we're coming back and I'm just like before, I'm doing kind of a darker mash in some places. Nature's kind of a hard thing to replicate while painting. You know, I found that I'm better off just trying to, you know, adopt nature than try and replicate it, because I can't paint that well. So now I'm giving it a very heavy wash with Nuln oil. I really want the grooves in between these stones to stand out and be very prominent. So I'm coming in very heavy, and now just pulling off a little bit in the areas where it's not quite as appropriate, like on top of the flat surface. That wouldn't be as dirty because wind and rain and stuff would push it off and push it down in these crevices. So that's kind of where I left it. Now after it's dry, you can kind of see what I've done, and I lost the pins again. And it's looking pretty good. And I was sitting there looking at it while it was drying, and it occurred to me, this guy's got toenails. And then I thought, I should probably paint those toenails. So I came in, this is the Reaper H-bone, and I'm just getting his toenails. They are way too bright right now. You know, I definitely don't want to have this be the finished tone, and then whenever anybody looks at the model, be like, hey, he's got some really great toenails. Yeah, you know, just grab my attention right away. Dragged my eyes right there. Because I didn't paint this model for toenails. But since he's got toenails, we should probably give him fingernails too. At least on the fingernails that are visible. He's got a couple hidden kind of up in a bald fist around the club. And you might remember I was talking about kind of a weird situation with his thumb. Yeah, if you didn't watch the previous video, I'm kind of confused as to why you're here now, because you missed the first half. But if you didn't, his thumb is kind of in a weird situation on that left hand. If you look at your thumb, you see it's kind of like a squared oval. Well, his is a very squared oval, but if you were to rotate your thumb 45 degrees, it's squared for that orientation. So it's like the thumb is rotated from where it's supposed to be. I don't know. It was probably just something in the mold. I'm sure the sculptor sculpted it correctly, and when they cast it, it twisted or something. Because it's just weird. So I ended up painting the thumbnail for where I thought it might fit more naturally than true curvature of the hand. And that's where it just comes down to accuracy in like anatomy versus accuracy in patience. Because I didn't want a thumbnail that covered like half of his thumb. It just looks strange. So while I've been blathering on, I took some Agrax Earthshade and just gave some tone to his nails, kind of tried to dirty him up a little bit. Metallic's dark instead of having them start that way. But I'm just getting the kind of the chunks on his club. They were kind of a weird texture. I guess based upon the texture, they are probably stone, especially given the stone nature of the stone giant. But I really felt there was enough stone on this model already. He's standing on rocks, he's got kind of rock colored skin, he's got a stone head on his hammer, so I wanted to make it not stone. So I went with a really dark, kind of hoping it would look like a real tarnished, kind of used metallic, so it looked really kind of grungy and beat up. For the most part, I really wanted it to look dirty, used. You know, I hate sometimes that most models in like showcases and stuff are pristine. You know, never battle damaged, they're never dirty, but I like to see a more active model. A model that maybe has killed a few people in the past, you know, maybe he hasn't done it right now, so it's not mega bloody or anything, but has that weathering and that look. Because I think that it adds a lot more character. So now I'm coming through with Nuln oil and trying to darken those fingernails a little bit more. They ended up being a lot brighter after the Agrax than I thought they would be. But after the Nuln oil dries, they were in a good place. They got dark like they were supposed to be. So now we're just working on the base. I am literally gluing rocks on. These are real rocks. Swear to God, I pulled them out of the desert, went and scooped them up. See, there's the bag. A whole bunch of rocks. And as I said before, nature always does it better. This is why when I make my bases, I use real sticks and I don't paint them. You know, I'm using real rocks. I do sometimes paint rocks, but usually they're not actually rocks. They're pieces of bark that I paint into rocks that are kind of like the rocks the giant is standing on. But definitely don't need to do that here because most of the base is that. So I got some smaller rocks and some bigger rocks and some brighter rocks and some darker rocks. And now I'm just adding a tuft. Tufts are wonderful things. They're just static grass that's glued and flat so it stands up. I really need to build a static grass applicator so that I can make my own tufts because tufts are kind of expensive. And I'd rather build my own and be able to have that flexibility over the size of the tufts. It's just kind of a picky thing. You know, I have got a little bit of background in model railroading, and having a static grass applicator is must have if you're building scenery there, because you want to have grass that stands up. Same basic principle. I'm just picky. Now we're just throwing a wash on the bronze. The same thing. Excuse me. The brass. Always get those metals mixed up. But just, it's the same wash. Agrax or shade. I decided to go with Agrax instead of the Sepia because I wanted it to be dirtier. Now I'm hitting these rocks with Nuln oil because when they come from the desert, they're really bleached and bright, and they're almost too bright for like what's going on the model. Most of the models I paint end up being darker than what would be like true real world comparisons. Just nature painting. It just happens that way because when it's real world it looks unnaturally bright. So I wanted these rocks I pulled from the desert to look like the rocks that are already on the model. So I gave them a wash. And now I am hitting these little dots on whatever tool that is and on the rivets on his gauntlet with chainmail silver. So I know I said I wouldn't put any silver on, but old habits die hard. So these are just super small highlights. You should be able to just barely see them, and it's just enough for a little bit of an accent. And that's, you know, pretty much gonna do it. Just do the little look around so you can see how everything looks. It's looking good. And, you know, this is pretty much it for the model. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below and I'll get to them as soon as I can see them. Otherwise, if you like what you've seen, please subscribe to our channel. And until next time, happy painting!